The 1963 Birmingham church bombing, one of the most tragic and heinous acts of racial violence in American history, remains a haunting symbol of the struggle for civil rights in the United States. The bombing was carried out by members of the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist group that sought to maintain racial segregation and oppress African Americans. This act of terror occurred on September 15, 1963, at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a prominent center for African American religious and political life during the Civil Rights Movement. Birmingham, Alabama in the early 1960s was one of the most racially segregated cities in the United States. Known as the most segregated city in America, Birmingham's racial tensions were intense. The city was a stronghold of the Klan, and many of its political and law enforcement leaders were openly sympathetic to white supremacy and segregation. The city's African American community, however, was resilient, with leaders like Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and others fighting for desegregation, voting rights, and equality. In 1963, the Civil Rights Movement was at its peak. That year alone saw key events like the Birmingham Campaign, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which involved mass protests, sit-ins, and marches aimed at ending segregation in public facilities and businesses. Birmingham's white power structure, including local police chief Bull Connor, responded with fierce opposition, using brutal tactics to suppress African American activism, including the use of fire hoses and police dogs against peaceful protesters. The protests garnered national attention and helped bring the movement to the forefront of American consciousness. The 16th Street Baptist Church was chosen as a gathering place for meetings, demonstrations, and marches because it was the largest African American church in the city and a well-known symbol of the community's strength. It was also a site where young people gathered to discuss the fight for civil rights, and where many meetings of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights took place, a group founded by Fred Shuttlesworth. On the morning of September 15, 1963, 4 members of the Klan, Robert Chambliss, Herman Frank Cash, Thomas E. Blanton Jr., and Bobby Frank Cherry, placed a bomb in the basement of the 16th Street Baptist Church. The church was packed with people, especially children who were attending Sunday school services. The bomb was powerful, with a 15 to 20-pound dynamite charge placed in a basement window. At approximately 10:22 a.m., the bomb exploded, killing 4 African American girls, Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, all between the ages of 11 and 14. Over 20 others were injured in the blast, including adults and children. The explosion shattered the church's windows and left a massive crater in the church's foundation. The bombing devastated the city's African American community, but it also galvanized the broader civil rights movement. In the immediate aftermath, Birmingham's African American leaders, including Shuttlesworth, called for calm and urged their community not to retaliate with violence, even though the shock and grief were overwhelming. However, the bombing did not go unnoticed by the wider American public. Media coverage of the bombing shocked the nation and raised awareness of the extreme lengths to which white supremacists were willing to go to preserve segregation. The bombing was part of a wider pattern of attacks and harassment aimed at stifling the civil rights movement and maintaining white supremacy in the South. The Klan, which had been responsible for many acts of terror against African Americans and civil rights activists in the South, saw the growing movement as a direct threat to their way of life. The bombing of the church, which occurred on the same day as a planned rally for civil rights, was a clear attempt to intimidate African Americans and their allies into stopping their efforts for desegregation and equality. The Ku Klux Klan, founded in 1865 during the Reconstruction era, had a long history of using violence and terror to maintain white dominance. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the Klan was responsible for numerous bombings, lynchings, and acts of terror against African Americans, Jewish people, and others who supported civil rights. In the case of the Birmingham church bombing, the perpetrators were hoping to strike fear into the hearts of those pushing for civil rights, particularly in Birmingham, which was viewed as a major battleground in the struggle for racial equality. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, the FBI began an investigation, but the case faced many challenges. Local law enforcement in Birmingham, including officials like Police Chief Bull Connor, were often sympathetic to the Klan, and the investigation into the bombing was slow and ineffectual. Despite initial attempts to solve the case, no arrests were made, and the bombing went largely unpunished for many years. The FBI's investigation continued for several years, but the Klan's influence in Alabama made it difficult to obtain information or secure convictions. The case was essentially dormant for over a decade, and the lack of progress in solving the bombing case became a symbol of the racial injustice that still prevailed in the South. However, in the 1970s, new developments brought renewed attention to the bombing. In 1971, evidence linking the bombing to Robert Chambliss, one of the original suspects, came to light. Despite this, Chambliss was not arrested until 1977, when he was finally charged with the murder of the 4 girls. In 1977, Chambliss was convicted of the bombing and sentenced to life in prison. The prosecution and the renewed public interest in the case led to further investigations and eventually led to the identification of 2 additional suspects. In 2000, after decades of legal battles and public outcry, 2 more Klan members, Thomas Blanton and Bobby Cherry, were charged with the bombing. Blanton was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to life in prison, while Cherry was convicted in 2002 and also received a life sentence. These convictions were seen as a measure of justice for the victims and their families, but many felt the process had taken far too long. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church had a profound and lasting impact on the civil rights movement and the United States as a whole. In the immediate aftermath, the bombing galvanized the movement, helping to draw attention to the urgency of desegregation and racial justice. The horrific loss of life, particularly the deaths of 4 young girls, highlighted the need for a stronger federal response to civil rights abuses in the South. The bombing also helped bring about significant legislative changes. Just a few weeks after the bombing, President John F. Kennedy, moved by the tragedy, publicly called for a national civil rights bill. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This landmark legislation was followed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed to eliminate barriers to voting for African Americans in the South. The bombing's legacy lives on in the continued fight for racial equality in the United States. The 16th Street Baptist Church itself became a symbol of the struggle for civil rights and was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2006. The church also houses the 16th Street Baptist Church Bombing Memorial and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, both of which educate the public about the events surrounding the bombing and the broader civil rights movement. The 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church was a horrific act of racial violence, designed to instill fear and maintain the oppressive system of segregation in the South. While it tragically claimed the lives of 4 innocent children, the bombing also sparked a wave of resistance and activism that helped to bring about significant changes in the fight for civil rights in the United States. The eventual convictions of those responsible for the bombing were an important measure of justice, though many believed that justice was long delayed. The bombing remains a painful chapter in American history, but it is also a reminder of the strength and resilience of those who fought for equality and justice even in the face of terror and violence.